here for International Design Day, which was established in 1995 by the International Design Council and is being hosted this year by the Society for Experiential Graphic Design. SCGD has come up with the theme, The Spaces in Between, for this year's IDD. And they have defined that as one that invites designers to focus on thresholds where ideas become experiences, individuals become communities, and where design shapes how we belong, relate, and coexist. I'm Ashley Lukasik. I'm the founder and principal of Murmur Ring, which is an experience design and storytelling agency. And I'm here today with Sue Walsh, principal of design at SYPartners, faculty at SVA, a deep writer and thinker, longtime, I guess, sort of mentee of the great Milton Glaser, and who I would just describe as one of the most meticulous and rigorous designers that I've met, who also has this unique and remarkable sort of openness to new ideas and ways of thinking, particularly in collaboration with others. And Sue, I was Googling today to try to find the perfect word to describe you. And I found this word called ludic, which, if you've never heard it before, is defined as playful, but often used in intellectual and design contexts, like games, systems, and exploration. And so I saw that and wanted to share it with you because I think it's perfect. So I think you're the perfect person to have this conversation about the spaces in between. And I wanted to start with asking you about this incredible project that you've shepherded, Now and Next, which is really just a stunning kind of design artifact that you've produced, sort of artful design at its best. And so I wondered if we could talk a little bit about the impetus for this project. What made you decide to do this?
So in October 2024, during the presidential campaign, I took 2 weeks off from work and I drove to Pennsylvania every day and canvassed for the Harris campaign. And then I would drive home at night and make dinner for my family. And the next day, get up, go back to Pennsylvania, canvass, and I did that for 2 weeks. I spoke with maybe 400 voters. Obviously, before the election, we didn't know who was going to win, which feels like a distant memory now, as we're a year and a half into this presidency. And I felt like I met a lot of people who were struggling and who were very real and open and honest. And my job as someone from the Harris campaign was to try to get them to vote for Kamala Harris. People weren't committing to who they were voting for. We later know that, Trump won Pennsylvania and won the general election. And through the experience of going there every day, driving on the highway, it was in the fall, and there was a drought in New England. It hadn't rained. The sky was blue for, every hour of every day I was there. And so I just witnessed this stunning fall of leaves changing and the beautiful New England autumn. And I was trying to hold two things at once, which many of us are always forced to do. Trying to imagine if Donald Trump won this election. And in my mind, I couldn't picture it. It was like the void of the Grand Canyon. I couldn't actually envision what that would be like. But I reminded myself on those drives that the following year, I could still see these leaves and I would still see autumn. And so that was kind of the genesis in a way for this project of how do you hold challenge, tragedy, trauma, living in tyranny with the possibility for a better future. And those can be very conflicting emotions, but I think it's our duty, especially as designers who have access to imagination and people's minds, to hold the possibility for a better future. So this is the piece, Now and Next. It's a printed newspaper. There's 3 sections in it. The first is about the feelings, which through research, I learned the most universal feeling in this country, regardless of political party, geography, is one of hopelessness. Mm-hmm. And I thought, wow, that's clarifying. And I think what's also happened is we forget that what is true. We're sort of stuck in this emotional place for many rational reasons. So the next chapter after the feelings is about the facts. And so it's about how we have made progress in the past. We're in the 250th year in this country. We are in a better place than we were 250 years ago in many respects, but there's clearly so much work still to do. So how do we, again, hold those sort of opposing tensions of both progress, but vast possibility to improve things in this country? And then the closing section is really around the potential of what's next and how do we start to cultivate our imaginations and ask ourselves, what is the future that we want? And maybe it doesn't have to be the future that is happening to us today. And so we chose a newspaper. I had many collaborators from SYP with this. It could never have been done independently. A newspaper is kind of a reflective piece. It's not a typical form of communication right now, but it does force you to stop a bit more and focus on the subject and sort of move through this emotional arc that we designed.
Yeah, I mean, the form is interesting, and I had written down before knowing this sort of origin story of the Harris campaign.
Yeah.
As you were exercising, I guess your right, but also perhaps what you might have seen as your duty.
Yeah, it really
in
felt like that.
Yeah. And, I mean, the newspaper, it's a democratizing form.
Yeah. I think, yes, it's a form of accessibility, an artifact that used to be the main way people would get information. Obviously, that's not the case now. And it's like more unique of an artifact.
Yeah.
But I think it's also just a nice respite from everything else that's pulling your attention.
So I've been showing this to everybody who comes over, design collaborators of mine, and everybody loves it. But the common reaction is the nostalgia of it, of this piece. And people have talked about the smell.
Aww.
Of what that smell is, sort of going into,
That was an unexpected part of it.
Yeah.
As it does remind you of a different moment in time.
One of the things that you and I share is this, I think, belief or an impulse, maybe is a better way to put it.
Sure.
To want to make things tangible and make things real as a way to navigate all of these different conversations that are happening on so many different levels. And to sort of see our way through the complexity of the moment that we're in. And I just wondered what you might say to that idea of making now.
Well, I think with this piece specifically, Now and Next, it was a real act of sense making. How do I understand this? And then even personally, how does making something help me feel better in a way that thinking doesn't, right? Making something, it becomes tangible. You have to make decisions. You can revise things. You can see them. Other people can see it. Other people can experience it. I think that there's just such an important aspect of putting something into the world that designers are amazing at. And it's so important for us to continue to do this for all sorts of reasons. But for this specific piece, it really helped me understand my point of view as a designer. And the role of making is an act of sense making.
And it gives us some agency, even over a small thing.
Yeah.
By taking all of that abstraction and bringing it down into something tangible that we can at least, wrap our minds around, wrap our hands around, but like this sort of, connection between, I think, the actual physical act of a thing.
And I think Milton Glaser was very much a big inspiration of how I came to this place. His instinct was always to start making something or continue to make something or imagine what we could make. And that was such a part of my time with him that it's almost like in my DNA at this point that making is the most useful thing we can do for ourselves, for our clients, for communities, and ultimately for the world.
Yeah, it's interesting thinking from, just sort of the profession of design. And it feels like everything always swings, right? The pendulum always swings, but it
Yeah.
feels like we're swinging back into a direction where design is more in that sort of like, I don't know, like the place of art or associated with art after a long period of time where design felt very closely married to business and perhaps have been kind of like validated by business.
Yeah, a tool of business.
Right, a tool of business, and where it was being embraced, by corporations as a way to open up new markets and understand
Sure.
consumers better and everything that happened in the past couple of decades. And now I feel like perhaps, especially in a context in which the political landscape is, the administration is so closely tied to the interests of business,
Yeah.
that now it's even more critical for us to put our creative capabilities and power toward this space of exploration and creatively imagining new possibilities.
Many people can experience this moment in time as, people were the hero once, but today it doesn't feel like that. Technology is the hero, AI is the hero, and people are, sitting at the back of the class wondering, what's going to happen to me? Will I have a job? Will I have a purpose? And that combined with this administration, which really, if the best way is to say it, I guess it is kind of a war on empathy, or at least an objection to empathy. And that feels, I think, coupled with technology, like people's value is just seen as very diminished in this moment. And that's very sad. There's a lot everyone can offer in the world, and we need each other. We've been around for 300,000 years as this species, and we need each other. And that can't change in such a short amount of time. And so I think as designers, can we be leaders in this way and use our capacity to imagine and our relationship with empathy to start to fill a void that is so clearly there in this moment?
I'm glad that you brought that up because that's my favorite page, or like, I guess sort of centerfold of this newspaper is this page that mostly breathes. It's mostly a graphic, but just says humanity has existed for 298,000 years. America has existed for 250.
Yeah.
And we're so beholden to these structures that we take for granted as being the only way, and have until recently for many Americans seen as being sort of infallible and stable.
Right.
And yet when you just look at that sort of blip on the radar in terms of everything else that's come before us, everyone who's ever come before us, and all these other ways of living and being and taking care of one another, it just suggests so many other possibilities for doing this better.
Yes.
And especially right now, I think there's a sort of soul searching, collective soul searching we need to find a better way because it isn't working. This way isn't working.
Like it's working. Yeah, I'm reading this book right now by Jonathan Haidt, who wrote The Anxious Generation, which he's very known for. He wrote another book maybe 15 years ago called The Righteous Mind. It's about why good people are divided by politics and religion. So again, imagine 2011, 2012 era. So different time than now, but not too far behind us. He talks about this point in history where people from Europe, were moving into different continents and, exploring the world in that way, colonizing the world. And they thought that what they saw was so different because the Western point of view is very individualistic in a way. And they would see communities actually all over the world sharing song, dancing, having these collective experiences. And that just reminds me, again, there's just so much more to our history that we don't understand and that we don't know. And our vantage point is so narrow, which is understandable, but we have to make different experiences or artifacts or conversations that remind us of our broader history and other aspects of humanity. Everyone's world is their own little tiny sliver of the experience of a bigger thing. And that's our nature. Our nature, I think, is to be self-centered. But how do we move against that current? And how can design help people move against that current?
Yeah, it's interesting because so much of the sort of fear and anxiety related to AI is, will I have a job tomorrow?
Yeah.
And I think the reality is we know that whole paradigm is going to shift. And so, like, will humanity exist in some form? Sure, but these structures and systems, as they're currently in place, are going to look very, very different. And it gives me some sort of semblance of hope, I think, to think about 298,000 years of human existence, to say, look, there are models that have existed for hundreds and thousands of years, much longer than the United States has existed,
Definitely.
that are still largely here in some form. I would like sort of posit that sort of systems that continue to exist and are resilient to the forces of colonialism, to climate change, to political and economic upheaval, whatever it may be, can persist if they are accountable to people and accountable to the planet at once.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, even you're touching on climate change, which there's a million reasons to feel hopeless about, of course. But through sort of researching this piece, like the majority of people in America believe in climate change. The majority of people feel like it's urgent. But you don't know that based on what you see and hear in the world and, obviously the actions of the Trump administration. And so I'm like, most people think this is a real thing. And we know there's so many solutions available, different kinds of energy. I mean, there's so much abundance that we can be using that we are choosing not to. And so if you start to see some of these issues I think climate change is a political issue right now, and it's not a technical issue. It's not lack of an imagination. It's not collective will. I think that makes you feel like there is more agency. And that's really, really important because the world is telling you you don't have agency right now. But I think we have much more than we think.
At an SEGD event in the fall, Bruce Mao spoke.
Yeah.
And made the comment that as something like, as designers, we don't have the luxury of being pessimists or something like that.
Yeah.
And so going back to design for a minute, and, thinking about this opportunity again, that like perhaps creative thinkers, maybe it's not always people who identify as designers have, and the sort of power that we have to help us creatively imagine into this, more expansively into this moment, is of interest to me, right?
Sure.
Particularly in light of the AI context, which is, at least for now, fairly derivative. Like it's taking all of this information that we already have and essentially mashing it up. So we get sort of an average that is always going to be limited in how good it is and how creative it is to that average. Which I've argued, could be sort of a pathway to mediocrity, sort of collective mediocrity. At the same time, it's also reinforcing personal bias. The more that we engage with specific tools and it feeds back to us what we want to hear and so on and so forth. So I just wondered what your thoughts are on sort of how do we, see our way towards something that can be more expansive and that allows for collective alignment, because that's the other major problem that we have.
I think, again, our brains want us to do what's easy a lot of the time. And so I think the easiest ways to use AI will lead us to more homogeneous thinking and making, because that's what's easiest. What's interesting is like, what are the edge cases? How can people use it to actually create different points of view? That's interesting. I was yesterday just working with a friend of mine, and he suggested I vibe code Milton's personality to make a chat bot and have what would Milton Glaser say about whatever we ask. So I'm in, feeding information, giving direction on the character development. And it's like, no matter what I did, I'm like, Milton would not say this. But I know that because I've worked with him for a long time. Mm-hmm. I think I'm also very curious around collective alignment, which I know is a lot of the work that you do. Mm-hmm. I would love to hear your thoughts on that, on the immersions that you design.
It's really strange, right? Like this idea that we want to have the idea of immortality. Well, I find really troubling.
Yeah.
But it's not surprising in a culture that's so individualistic as ours is. And we don't have a common language or understanding or way to really learn from and celebrate death in the same way that many other cultures do. I think it's a problem for us because we're fighting against the inevitable. It's one of the only certain things that we know.
Right.
So we're all going to die. And yet we act, even in the way that we talk about sickness, when somebody gets cancer, it's, well, you'll survive this because you're strong, as if it's somehow a weakness of a person if they get ill and die.
I mean, speaking of cancer and death, last year I lost 3 friends who all died way too young from cancer, and one of them was a colleague here at SYPartners, and this piece is dedicated to him. And when he was, I think he died around 2 months after this text exchange that we had, and I was working on this project, which was an interesting kind of duality of thinking about what's next and what's possible in my friend knowing that he was going to die. We were texting about hope, and he's like, hope is what keeps the train moving. And I just thought, what a beautiful thing to share from his vantage point. And he knew he was going to die shortly, several weeks later. And he really did have hope throughout the end of his life. And I think that changes through, you hope that you have a good day with your daughter. You hope the sky is blue. You hope you're not in a lot of pain. But it's such a different orientation to life. And I remember he was saying, when you get cancer, you see everything as more beautiful. And I thought, wow, what a gift to share with us. Which I know is maybe not where we thought this was going to go.
Well, I have a couple kind of immediate reactions to that. I mean, one is I felt like my own father's death was actually a gift in some ways too, because it lifts the veil on these more profound existential understandings of the world that we don't always tap into early enough in life to be able to leverage it and think about what we're here to do in different ways. And I think that we could think about birth and death, not just in the literal sense of people but being born and dying, but also the form of ideas in organizations, in all of these different in experiments that are born and then die, and all these things that we invest ourselves in that we have to say goodbye to, different moments.
Sure.
But those moments where things fracture, and even in the friction, maybe leading up to that, or just the friction that exists in everyday life and work, those are the most important moments to learn from. That holds so many answers. And so if we can kind of be strong enough, maybe courageous enough to get out of our own, how is this going to affect me and my feeling of security and safety right now?
Yeah.
To, we have a gift at a moment we can learn from. There's so much more that can come from that than just the moments in which things are where we feel content and safe.
I'm always thinking about that. And I think, again, that I feel like I'm like a proselytizer about design, but design really does help you see things differently. And helps you see your own life differently? And how do you help people sort of identify those moments in ways that perhaps they don't immediately do? There is just so much change in this industry right now. People are asking, is creativity dead? Right? People are asking, is there a future in design? And I think the answer is no, creativity is not dead. And yes, there is a future in design. I think a question of how much do people want to pay for those things is a question that is not answered. But those are part of being human. And if we've existed for 298,000 years, some of us recognized as designers, but most of us as designers to some extent in our own lives.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, when you think about it, it's like, is design dead? That's such a narrow definition for what design is.
I know. And I think for me, design is just such an orientation to approaching things with possibility, imagination, discovery, and really asking, how do we improve this? And if you look at this world, there's a lot that we can improve. There's so many problems. And you start wondering, are businesses really solving the problems that people have? Are governments solving the problems that people have? And I don't know if there's clear answers to that, but there are definitely a lot of problems which lead to design opportunities.
Yeah.
I wonder sometimes, I was trying to mail one of these copies of Now and Next. There's no pen at the post office. And I'm like, why are we trying to build super intelligence when you can't even mail something at the post office? It's like there's a lot of opportunities and rooms for improving things.
I actually think, in terms of the profession of design, that it might absolutely explode
Yeah.
after some leg, right? Because things are really in flux right now. But because so much is going to be shifting, and there's going to be so much white space to sort of design into, and gaps that we need to fill, and moments that we're going to need to create to sort of shepherd people through.
Yeah.
I just think like that the possibilities for sort of design at its best,
Yeah.
at its most empathetic and creative and systems level, will be ample.
We've spoken about this in preparation for this talk of, what are different models that we may see in the future. And it seems like, there's within design, advertising, creative industries, there's so many mergers, sort of companies, morphing, evolving in their scale and size, breaking into different pieces. What if there were just many more smaller companies and there was more autonomy and agility within these smaller organizations, more personality led, less kind of systems driven?
One of the things that I noticed, because, when I came into the field of design, it was sort of late aughts. And it was a time when design thinking was really exciting to big corporations.
Right.
And I was sort of seeing even then, like, okay, as this starts to become, as this gets adopted, right, by big companies, it gets sort of diluted and becomes another business process, not unlike maybe agile or something else.
Sure.
And in order to like deliver at the volume and scale to keep these large, ever larger sort of consultancies afloat, things have to become more predictable in terms of the form in which they're delivered. And so then it naturally follows that the projects and the processes get kind of formulaic. And that's sort of the antithesis of how design works.
Yeah.
If you're starting a project and you don't know the outcome because you're ostensibly designing something new, you shouldn't be able to structure it just around sort of 3 months every time. with this size team at this many hours.
You're making me think of two things. One is when design thinking emerged, I was working with Milton at the time, and I just remember we were talking. I'm like, isn't it just called thinking? Like, what is, I don't understand what I really was a little bit confused, honestly, but now obviously it's, it's a method, it's a methodology that companies could use and learn. I mean, this is really the crux of a real contradiction in the business landscape, where companies want to do something new, but they need to know it will not fail. And as we know, things that are new have risk. And that's really tough. And I understand, I have empathy for that, for sure. You have people on payroll, you have obligations, you have shareholders. There's so many different stakeholders in a corporation, different things to be responsible for. I really, really have empathy for that situation, but it makes it challenging to do new things. And I think we're experiencing right now, there's actually a much bigger gravitation to the new with AI. And so companies are in a race. How will this, make me more efficient? How will I compare to my competitors? So there's actually a lot of new things, I think, that companies are trying from that perspective. But I think that this is an abnormal time in relationship to them.
We've been talking about like the erosion of imagination in this conversation, but there's also the erosion of trust, fundamentally through and through from top to bottom.
Yeah.
Like society at large, then within industries, then within the specific organizations that people work for. People not even sure if they can trust themselves.
Judgment.
Like to ChatGPT, tell me what I should do about this major life decision instead of basing their decisions off of their own instinct and the experience that they already have.
Yeah. So
trust is at an all-time low. And that is another like weird contradiction right now. Organizations or whatever, are sort of like asking people to lean into like the new.
Right.
Without establishing any trust. And also at a moment in which sort of people are being devalued as units of production that cost something.
Yep.
The idea is to replace people. So there's nothing in these systems that's engendering trust, which is going to be the fundamental way that these efforts will be successful into moving into a new and unknown space. Is that it's based in trust.
I think also when you think of what's generated from AI, you can make anything. You can write any content. You can code anything. You can create any form, but you cannot create trust. You cannot create belief. And those are things that you need people to do. People can create belief. People can create trust and faith. And so I don't know where that's going to go, but it's a real issue.
I see it as being directly in parallel with what's happening in the acceleration of digital. Yeah. And all of this time that we're spending in digital environments with all this information overload of bad news, and almost to the point where you can't even sift through it.
Yeah.
People are overwhelmed and alone, and they're not doing the things that just ground us and make us human, like walking from meeting to meeting. I'm talking about the difference of now versus just pre-pandemic.
Right.
We've changed our world and way of operating very, very quickly, and we don't evolve that quickly.
No,
we're like dinosaurs, essentially.
We don't.
So we've created this like kind of world that's not very hospitable to who we are as human beings, and people feel it. Like individually, people feel unsettled.
Definitely.
So they're looking for, a place of belonging.
Yeah, I mean, that's such a great point of like how work has even changed so much in just such a very short amount of time. And there used to be spaces in between the theme of this, meeting to meeting, walking. We're place-based people. We just are. We belong in different places and we want to connect to a place. And that has really been fractured with the way people work now. I also feel like this is a time of exploration. I've started at age 47 to take voice lessons because I think singing is actually really important right now. And so maybe I will become a singer. I don't know. But
I hope so.
I think that there's just so much more to our lives that we're being invited to think about right now. Of what life do we want? How do we want to experience this world? We have these bodies in our minds, in our hearts. And what do we want to do with that? I also am a lifelong runner, and I like that feeling of doing something with my body. I like the feeling of being in a big marathon with other people who've worked hard and are trying to do something that they don't know if they can do it. It's so amazing. Like, there's so much to do. There's so many things to explore. And I think we can't forget that because that's always going to be a source of inspiration.
We were talking earlier about the idea of, we were thinking about Obama and hope as the pillar of his campaign. And we had this conversation about why hope feels like a radical idea today.
Yeah.
But as you were talking about the marathon, I was thinking about like the protests.
Yeah. Oh my God.
And people coming together. And that's a lot of singing and dancing and drumming and stuff as
amazing.
Well, and costumes. And, and people that don't participate will often say to me, it doesn't move the dial,
right.
Or that's not, and to each their own.
Sure.
But for me, one of the primary reasons to go is to just be in the company of other people, lots of other people who I don't know,
right,
but who I have a sort of renewed sense of confidence in being near.
Yeah.
That, hey, we share a sort of general desire and belief in collective well-being.
Definitely. I think we don't see a lot of courage against this administration from leaders in this country, business, etc. It's changing a bit, but you see courage from communities. I mean, watching some of these people in Minneapolis with nothing, standing up against people who are fully armed, can really bring you to tears. It's incredible what people can do. And if you feel connected to a community and a shared experience, I think it's called collective effervescence, when you feel like you're bigger than something that you are and you're connected to a bigger part of humanity, it really can make you feel like there's entire worlds that are possible, and it does instill hope. And it's such an important thing to do. And again, to each their own with like, if people want to protest or not, I understand that. I think we've also gotten a little bit affected by how we experience the world, how we think everything needs to be fast and immediate. And so if we do a protest and the next day nothing's different, we're like, that didn't work. But I think we have to do anything that we can.
Well, on the Minneapolis tip, I'm from there.
Yeah.
So it's been heartbreaking, but also so uplifting to see what has happened on the ground. But I also think about the earlier part of our conversation when we were talking about making things real, when things are tangible, when they're right in front of you, then they can become actionable. And we can find agency again. So I think what's happened in Minneapolis is people saw that their neighbor wasn't safe to leave their house or whatever it might be. I mean, I heard these little stories about shoveling their neighbors' cars and driveways out. Yeah. Because this is happening right in the middle of, a very cold and snowy winter with all of the ice activity. Those kinds of acts where people see the solution so clearly because it's real and it's not sort of in this, like this abstraction that we're getting lost in. Yeah. It's our own life. It's our own street. The way that people have mobilized, like everyone from, those who are accustomed to frequent and regular activism to like, the soccer moms out there with whistles, it was amazing.
It's really remarkable what people can do. It's really extraordinary. And I think we cannot forget that in this moment. And Ashley, I'm curious about your own work. And when you think of collective alignment and you have these incredible immersive experiences, the immersions that you design. How do you think about that? And how can you share?
Well, when I started doing this work, it was over 10 years ago, like 11 years ago, like the first sort of like real immersions that I ran. And at first, it was a different way of delivering design, which sometimes with design strategy, as you know, or human-centered design or systems design, it can be kind of a black box and kind of opaque.
Sure.
So how do you bring people along with you on a journey into that mindset of new discovery and meaning making? That was the idea. Now, in 2026, I've started to think about it more as an intervention to the way that we're living our lives and the way that we're working and the way that we're engaging. And an opportunity where people can come together through direct encounters with one another, experience things for themselves and arrive at their own insights that can only come from like truly, I think, like embodied experience.
Yeah.
People go to other countries to learn languages, and we think about the major moments in our lives that we're identity forming. They are learning an instrument, playing a sport, losing a game and what you learned from that, having a baby, your like moments that you went through with your best friends, whatever. These are like that's like the stuff of life.
Yeah.
But somehow, as we think about how to sort of solve for the problems that we're facing and do the work that we're doing, we want to treat everything as some kind of linear pathway to a singular destination, and that everything's sort of about logic and stamping your time and whatever else.
One might say efficiency.
Operational efficiency. And so with the immersions as a tool of intervention, it's more about grounding the things, the big topics and the big problems that we need to solve and the big issues that we need to look at, grounding it in real experience that makes it palpable, and we can arrive at our own insights both individually and collectively.
Yeah.
That help us establish belief, get reacquainted with our own values, confront things that might be challenging, and be in a place where we're both sort of physically, bodily, and intellectually connected.
Yeah.
And that's what we're always attempting to do.
Yeah, I think that work is so important. And even thinking about the environment that people are in is so critical, and what they include or don't include in that environment. And people are so kind of locked in to like an efficient corporate life. And there's just so many other ways to be in this world.
It's not going to be a one-to-one, but there's so much that we can learn. Even if we're like in Peru, we're going back to Peru in June. It's like, even if we're there, we can look at models that have worked for a very long time and go, okay, there are these sort of core principles to this thing that's worked that we could apply. And so we have to counterbalance all of the negativity with really concretely examining what's positive.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, I mean, I have a sort of a strong belief that we need to kind of get out from behind the screens and come back together in that way.
Yeah. And we have 298,000 shared years of history that we can draw from. I think this is a time where we cannot let the world tell us what to think and what to believe and how to feel. We have to create these things that help inform how people experience the world. So I think that's...
We've at least answered maybe a little bit of the question of like what we should be doing in the field of design, or just like actually just create conditions, create different conditions.
Sure. Yeah.
So, okay, we're going to do a little lightning round.
Okay.
Here as we wrap up this thought-provoking and like rather emotional conversation. We went a little deeper than I thought we might.
Me too. It's always a surprise. You don't know how things are going to go.
Okay. So, Sue, a space that you think is almost perfectly designed for human connection.
On a riverbank.
I should ask you to elaborate, but
I think just looking at water and being together and looking out over something. Many times I find actually through running with people, you're not looking at each other, you're side by side. And that opens conversation. It's a different structure than looking into someone's eyes. So I think side by side, looking in a river.
Your favorite space between?
Maybe the hours between 4 and 5 a.m. I'm a very early riser. And nobody is up at that time who needs anything from you, namely your family or your colleagues at work because they're rational and they're sleeping. And I have coffee and I usually get ready and go running. And it is a time of devotion, my perfect space in between night and day.
The one thing you wish school or design school taught that it does not?
I think this is changing, but I would say your role as a designer is not about expressing your ideas only. Your role of as a designer is to improve the world. Many times in design school, the structure of it is to celebrate your own expression, and then people get surprised when they enter the workforce, and it's not just about their ideas and their own thinking. And so I think that's an opportunity to keep evolving.
What is a word that you wish your clients would use more?
I think in this moment in time, emotions have been, devalued in a way because it is a time of survival right now, I think, with a lot of companies. And I understand that. Again, there's so much uncertainty in this world. I get that. But the emotional experience you want people to have and the feelings that you want to create are more important now than ever.
Complete this sentence. Design fails when?
We don't think about what people need.
And design succeeds when?
We create possibility and help people live a better life.
Thank you for this conversation with me.
You're welcome.
It's been great.
Yeah.
And I'm glad that FWD brought us together to just take this moment.
Definitely.
And sit in the space in between.
Yes. Thank you, Ashley.